Hey there, students. The scene here is I'm like this high school teacher who teaches its geometry. The thing in front of us here is called concentric hierarchy or cosmic hierarchy, if you want to sound more cosmic. It's just nested polyhedrons, one inside another. Kepler did this kind of thing. It's not a new idea to nest polyhedra. It helps you remember them that way when they're nested like this and they're color coded. You might remember a previous video I did about, let's see, let's not do that. Let's go to this YouTube here. So I take that concentric hierarchy and turn it into an animation, a kind of animation I call a hypertune, which means we've got playheads. You don't see the playheads. They're just going along these short segments. And every so often they come to a switch point where there's a choice as to what to do next, what to show next. And the playhead randomly chooses from among those choices. And there's two playheads going simultaneously here. And I don't know exactly every time I run this what the sequence will be. Like the two scenarios are going to be tightly contained because they're all about the same thing, the concentric hierarchy, this way of interrelating the polyhedra. So I'm like this high school teacher, and I teach this obscure geometry that if you look on the web, you'll find practically nobody is teaching. So I do feel special in just a kind of uncomfortable way, though, in some ways, because I don't feel that this stuff should be so obscure, right? It was the American futurist R. Buckminster Fuller who devoted his life to some serious geometry studies, but there's been a lot of discrediting of him. So it's like the reason we don't teach Bucky is because blah, blah, blah. And then there's all this like defamation that goes on. It's kind of low key. It doesn't take a lot to keep this geometry out of high school. It doesn't. Because there's not much polyhedra in high school to begin with. So there's not much to take out. But what if we could bring the polyhedra back, and what if we could do it in the context of filling out your vocabulary with these things like A module, B module, and that's what this little video is going to be about, the modules. And how many are there in Synergetics? Really, you can remember the acronym BEAST, B-E-A-S-T. That's how many. There's the A and the B, so here they are. Think of the regular tetrahedron, and those gray edges are the rods connecting closest packed spheres in the isotropic vector matrix, or we could call it the CCP, FCC. Another topic. Anyway, there's a fixed length to that gray edge, so we know what we're talking about in terms of size. Regular tetrahedron. You divide it up into 24 little wedges, and we call those A modules. And here the battle begins, because when you're dealing with, say, a community, an ingrown culture, do they adopt nomenclature willy-nilly? No. There's a lot that goes into agreeing or not agreeing to use nomenclature. So no one wants to use Fuller's nomenclature for these things. That's part of it. Like, does anyone else have a name for the A module? Is that called something else in a different geometry? Go look, go see if you can find it, maybe. But Fuller's very explicit, and he gives the plane nets, in other words, the lengths and angles and all this. Now you'll see a little yellow module atop the blue one. These are by Richard Hawkins, by the way, a very early collaborator working on a silicon, what was it called? Silicon graphics terminal, I believe. He had really good aesthetics here too, so I've used his pictures with permission. Richard Hawkins, there's an RH there. See where that goes. Portfolios, so lots of things that he's done for me or with me, right? We did a whole movie together called Clocktet, and he's got a digital archive. Is that still out there? Yes. Okay, so he's studied these A and B modules probably as much as anybody. And this is, going way back now to the 90s. This website, to our eyes, probably looks kind of old or different or alien, but that's the way it goes. So check out the Richard Hawkins stuff. Be inspired, because what I'm trying to do with this video, especially if you're like in high school, is say, hey, here's an almost, it's a pristine area because not much is being done here, and yet it has a bright future, I would say. And so do you. So there's where we were in my most recent video with the 12 spheres packing around a center sphere, and we're showing rhombic dodecahedra can surround every sphere and pack together, okay, and fill space and stuff like that. So that's one way to wrap a sphere. But, okay, and these are the volumes that I'm talking about in the concentric hierarchy. See, we've started out with the tetrahedron as unit volume, and that gives us these other volumes. So I've talked about the A and the B modules. What else? Okay, how do they all fit together? If you're ever wanting a summary, come over to Wikipedia and scroll down to this little chart where we summarize these polyhedra for you. Name or shape and then the volume relative to the unit volume tetrahedron, and you see the A and the B modules and the T module, which I'm going to get to, all have volume 1/24, 1/24. And then the E module, it's hard to maybe decipher this volume using phi or phi, I say phi. And then the S module, also expressed in terms of phi. So these little tetrahedral wedges, they're all little tetrahedral wedges, then go on to build other shapes, such as mainly the A's and the B's together make what's called a mite, which is a space-filling tetrahedron, irregular, consists of 2 A's and 1 B. I'm not going to try to go through all of these polyhedra in one video here. I just wanted to give you a sense that there's modules. There's the concentric hierarchy again, just looking in terms of ray tracing, okay? So let's do the T and the E modules and then the S module as our final one. So T and E, let's see. Go to the Synergetics figure index. Very important place to just get all the graphics in Synergetics. The Bucky Fuller philosophies distilled in one place, although these are only the section 900 graphics, right? Where the most of them are, actually. I mean, 900 is very rich with graphics. Talks about the mite being built with A's and B's and so on, but what I'm looking for is the T and E module discussion, which comes further down here. We're going to find that the T and the E are pretty much the same module. It's just they differ in radius a little bit. If you remember, let me, as a story, go back to shrink wrapping the, let's see, where is that? Do I not have my volumes? Let's get those volumes back. Volumes, HTML. Oh, that's not going to help me find them. Okay, let's see. Here, these are the volumes. Okay, part 2. So you may remember this graphic. There's a good view of the concentric hierarchy minus the 5-fold symmetric ones, which are starting to be introduced here in part 2. There's something called the jitterbug transformation that takes us from this yellow cube octahedron to an icosahedron with the same edge lengths. And that is a reduction in volume from 20 to 18.51. There's a ratio there. The ratio of that cube octahedron to the icosahedron. Also, there's a concept of a dual you're going to want to pick up, which is same number of edges, but every face turns into a point, every point into an edge, you could say. So that crisscross of those two, the icosahedron and the pentagonal dodecahedron, which is in the cyan color, no, the icosahedron cyan, then the brown, or whatever we want to call it, pentagonal dodeca crisscross, and if you connect all these points, you can make a rhombic tricontohedron out of that, which is there, and it shrink wraps down around the ball. And when it shrink wraps down around the ball, that's where we can get our T and our E modules. We can sort of put a crisscross at the center of every one of those diamond faces. So let's see. Let's go. Where do I have this again? This graphic, by the way, is going to help with the S module. I'll come back here. I'll leave it here so we can come back and do the S module. So the difference between the T and the E module, they're both going to shrink wrap. They're both going to shrink wrap the unit radius. Well, they're not both going to shrink wrap. The E module's rhombic tricontohedron is going to shrink wrap. Looking for the key picture here, is going to shrink wrap the unit radius sphere, the E module one. Here, this will work. So here's the unit radius sphere, shrink wrapped, meaning that every crisscross of the 30 diamonds just touches the sphere. They're tangent at that point. And this total volume of this thing is of interest. And it's going to be a tiny, tiny bit more than five tetravolumes, 5 tetrahedrons worth of water are going to completely fill this, and then a little bit more is going to fill it. But that begs the question, what size would this rhombic tricontohedron have to be exactly 5? Not a little bigger than 5, but perfectly 5. Well, you shrink the radius a tiny bit. The radius goes from the center to each of the crisscrosses. We'll define it that way. So shrink the whole thing just a tiny bit. How tiny bit? That was this other picture where we show, let's see, there's a caption. He writes about this, but basically it would be, if this was 10 inches radius, if the radius were 10 inches, you'd need to shrink it by 1/200th of an inch. So like very, very, very little difference between the T and the E module surface. So that's a whole discussion in synergetics, right? So that's A, B, T, E. Now what about the S module? So we'll go back here. Do I even have the S module there in Wikipedia, right? So let's figure out about the S module. There it is. You can unfold these modules and get like a plane net. And then you can feed all those lengths into a formula and compute the volume that way is one way to go. So the S modules brick in the space between a icosahedron and cyan, you'll see it there, and the surrounding octahedron that's red. You want to fill in the space between those two. And I have a Jupyter notebook on that, which we're looking at, where we verify that if you add 24 S modules to that contained icosahedron, you brick in the gaps around it with 24 S modules, you'll build the octahedron of volume 4. Now, none of these pictures are as good as one that I remember here from the figure index. So remember this picture for T and E modules. You couldn't visually tell the difference. You could say, is this the T modules tricontohedron or the E modules tricontohedron? Well, 1/200th of an inch of a 10-inch radius, you're not going to be able to really see the difference really between them unless we do some special enhancements. So back to the figure index, however, is what I want to do and find the best picture that's there of the S module. Let's see how fast I can find it. I think, no, not there. That's the one. So there's an icosahedron. It's got a bunch of dotted lines that are kind of behind the front. And there's an octahedron that may be a little hard to see for you. H is an apex of it. So there's a square equator of this octahedron, and you can see the big triangles coming up to this tip at H, and there'd be another one on the other side. You know octahedron, right? So there's inscribed facially flush. There's an icosahedron that's right up against the octahedron with kind of rotated triangles. There's a lot of discussion there exactly how that works and all. But then it leaves this gap between said icosahedron and octahedron is this S module, a left or right, and then you fill in with the left and rights, 12 of each, 24 total, and those are your S modules. So that's it, the BEAST. There's some 3D printed S modules with a pen to show you what the scale was for those. Now these are phi scaled related to each other. 1.618. So this one has edges. Edges 1.618 times the smaller one. And what we've discovered, what David Koski has discovered really, is that he can express the main volumes of Synergetics in terms of S modules, phi up and phi down. In other words, we do so many of this size S, so many of this size phi up, so many of this size phi down, add them together, and we can get these volumes. So that pretty much covers it. You now know you're now in the inner circle of the 1% or 0.1% who know anything about any of this stuff, right? It's not taught in your typical high school, but it is taught in mine. And there's a lot more here with computing and programming and Python. So feel free to explore. I'm doing this on Rumble to sort of catch you up if you haven't been following me on YouTube, but there's like lots on YouTube about all of this stuff. So I'll put a link. All right, looking forward. Talk soon.